A 60-year-old grandmother finishes packing her suitcase, walks past her stunned husband and son, and heads out the front door for a 20-day vacation with her friends. Behind her, the household immediately descends into chaos. Her daughter-in-law just landed a new corporate job and was banking on the older woman to be the default full-time babysitter. Meanwhile, her husband is furious because, for the first time in 40 years, he might actually have to fetch his own glass of water. When we take a corporate job, we sign a piece of paper that dictates our hours, our pay, and our time off. But traditional domestic life operates on a different set of rules. It runs on the unwritten domestic contract, an invisible agreement where the compensation is $0 and the duration is lifelong. In the professional world, the entire goal of working is to eventually stop. You put in your decades of labor so you can retire and rest. But for a traditional housewife, retirement doesn't exist. The expectation is that she will manage the home until she physically can't. We often look at modern dual-income households and praise how progressive they are. But if you look closely at how those households actually function, you realize that progressive lifestyle is almost entirely subsidized by the regressive, unpaid, and endless servitude of the older generation living in the back bedroom. In a typical multi-generational home, a young daughter-in-law getting a corporate promotion is cause for a massive celebration. The family rallies behind her career ambitions. But someone still has to cook, clean the floors, and watch the baby. That massive domestic void is quietly handed over to the mother-in-law. This chart shows how that workload evolves. A traditional wife starts her unpaid labor phase around age 17, serving strict in-laws. She spends decades managing her husband and raising her children. And when you'd think her shift is over, a new phase begins, raising grandchildren. This creates a bizarre cultural paradox. The moment the matriarch decides she wants to stop working and actually enjoy her life, the same family that considers itself highly modern and educated goes into a complete panic. Their entire economic infrastructure relies on her labor being free. We have a generation of young adults celebrating their financial and social independence without realizing how deeply flawed that independence really is. They are able to step out and conquer the world solely because they demand continued subjugation from the women who raised them. So what actually causes a woman like Kaveri to finally breach this contract? For 40 years, she was a 24/7 caretaker for a highly demanding, abusive mother-in-law. When that mother-in-law finally passes away, Kaveri doesn't see it as a tragedy. She sees it as the end of a 4-decade prison sentence. She initiates a wildcat strike. She completely abandons the kitchen and leaves the dirty dishes to pile up. She swaps restrictive traditional saris for practical, loose-fitting suits. And she reclaims her bodily autonomy by enrolling in a local classical dance class. The family and the surrounding community immediately lash out when Kaveri posts videos of her dance routines online. Her husband and son accuse her of destroying the family's reputation. They use heavy words like morality, tradition, and shame to attack her hobbies and try to force her back into the kitchen. This flowchart tracks the mechanics of the pushback. Both the moral outrage and the concern for tradition funnel directly into the economic panic of losing 24/7 unpaid labor. Society weaponizes the concept of tradition. By framing domestic servitude as a noble duty, the family successfully guilt-trips the older generation into working for free without a single complaint. There is a flip side to this rebellion. What happens when the domestic worker fully internalizes that company line? Take another mother-in-law, Mamta. When her son gets married, Mamta absolutely refuses to let her new daughter-in-law lift a finger to help around the house. She insists on cooking every meal, cleaning every room herself, and hoarding all the household labor, even as her knees ache and she is physically exhausted. This diagram highlights the psychological trap she's caught in. After decades of having her self-worth tied strictly to her domestic output, asking for help feels dangerous. The refusal of help leads to physical exhaustion, which loops right back into a deep-seated fear of obsolescence. If she stops working, she fears she will become a useless burden. It is textbook institutionalization. You see this with long-term prisoners or employees who have spent their entire lives within a rigid system. They become so accustomed to their confines that the prospect of freedom, or simply sharing the workload, is actually terrifying. The mental conditioning that convinces a mother her value is measured in chores becomes a prison more restrictive than any physical kitchen. Kaveri shatters that conditioning head-on. In a final confrontation with her husband and son, she verbally dismantles their hypocrisy. For 40 years, she woke up at 4 a.m., managed endless guests, and endured daily verbal abuse from her in-laws, all while her husband stood by in silence. She sets a hard boundary. She explicitly rejects the role of default babysitter. If her son and daughter-in-law want to prioritize their corporate careers, they have to figure out their own childcare. Her time is finally completely hers to control. Mamta requires a different path. Deeply institutionalized workers often need external intervention. It takes her sister visiting and openly praising the daughter-in-law's cooking to break the spell. Mamta finally realizes that sharing the workload doesn't make her obsolete. It simply allows for a richer, less exhausted life. Both households reach a new equilibrium. The unwritten domestic contract is permanently voided. In its place, they establish renegotiated terms. These new terms prioritize the matriarch's personhood. The family interacts with her as an individual with her own desires, rather than a household appliance. True modernization of a society remains completely hollow if young women enter the workforce by stepping on the backs of the mothers they leave at home. For a family to actually move forward, society must finally normalize retirement for the matriarch.